The sea shimmered below us, dark and endless, its waves whispering secrets against the rocks far beneath our hotel. I stood barefoot on the balcony, the silk hem of my nightgown brushing against my ankles, warmed by the last breath of the Santorini sun. Honeymoon. The word felt foreign, too soft in my mouth. A ribbon-wrapped promise. Only mine had already begun to unravel. Adrian's voice drifted through the slightly open glass door behind me. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I had stepped out to breathe, to press my forehead against the night, to ground myself after too much champagne and too little clarity. But when I heard my name, I stilled. "She's a charity case," he said, his voice light, amused, as if discussing a stray animal he'd taken in. Honestly, I married her more, out of pity than anything else. She needed saving, and I figured, why not? At least I'll get some credit for it. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated like dandelion seeds, soft and disjointed. But they landed like stones, a charity case. My mouth opened and closed soundlessly. My hand found the cold metal of the railing as my knees weakened, and I leaned into the stone to steady myself. The wedding ring on my finger, just 3 days old, suddenly weighed too much. I lifted my hand to my chest and clutched at it, as if I could take back the vow, the moment, the whole ceremony. He chuckled again inside the room. "She's just so grateful all the time. It's exhausting." I felt the bile rise in my throat. I turned my face away from the door, toward the sea, letting the wind slap my cheeks dry. My chest tightened with something I couldn't name. Not quite grief, not quite rage. It was colder, quieter, a slow freezing from the inside out. When I finally stepped back inside, the air in the suite felt heavy with his cologne, woody and sharp, the same one he wore on our wedding day. I had once found comfort in that scent. Now it clung to the walls like a lie. Adrian looked up from his phone, smiled. "Hey babe, everything okay?" I smiled back. I don't know how. My face moved on its own, some ancient instinct of survival kicking in. "Just needed some air," I said softly, brushing imaginary hair behind my ear. I moved past him, felt the warmth of his arm graze mine. My stomach twisted. I went to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, letting the sound of rushing water drown out the sound of my heart breaking. In the mirror, my reflection looked strange. Not like a bride, not like a wife. More like a stranger at her own wake. I stared into my own eyes, searching for something. Fury, sorrow, something hot and alive. But all I found was a kind of numbness that frightened me. That night, I lay in bed beside him while he scrolled through his emails, his fingers tapping out replies with bored efficiency. He kissed my forehead absently before turning off the lamp. "Love you," he murmured, already half asleep. I didn't respond. I stared at the ceiling long after the room went dark, watching the faint shadows of the curtains sway like ghosts. I could still hear his words, not shouted, not cruelly flung in anger, but worse, spoken casually, thoughtlessly, with the ease of someone confident in his superiority. He believed them. That's what undid me. The man I had trusted with my vulnerability, my body, my future. He had seen me as a project, a broken toy to fix. A story to tell at dinners, complete with a rescue arc and a grateful damsel ending. And I had played my part so well. I turned onto my side, away from him. The sheets rustled like dry leaves. My fingers reached for the wedding ring again, and this time I slipped it off, letting it rest on the nightstand. Not as a decision, just a pause, a small act of rebellion, a moment to breathe without its weight. I thought of the bracelet he gave me the day before. Diamonds, thin, beautiful. He had fastened it around my wrist with a kiss and a joke. I had smiled. Now I saw it differently, a leash disguised as love. Something inside me shifted that night, not like a landslide, but like the first crack in ice. A hairline fracture, invisible to most. But it was there. And I knew, in some quiet, terrifying way, that I would never love him again. Not really, but I also knew I couldn't show it. Not yet. A storm was forming behind my ribs. Not loud, not wild, just still and certain. They say you don't realize the water is rising until you're drowning, but I think I always knew. I just told myself the tide was a warm bath. When I met Adrian, I was juggling 3 part-time jobs, walking to work in shoes with worn-out soles, always calculating whether I had enough change for a coffee. My life was stitched together with frayed hope and late-night ramen. I didn't need rescuing. I needed rest. But when he looked at me across that crowded art gallery, it felt like the universe had taken pity. He bought the only painting I'd eye, lingered in front of some abstract piece I could never afford, and said it reminded him of me. Unpolished, he had murmured, tilting his head. But real. Honest. Not trying so hard. I had flushed at that. No one had ever called me honest like it was a compliment. Back then, I didn't realize how easily admiration could rot into ownership. Our dates were a whirlwind. Rooftop dinners, surprise theater tickets, wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I remember once trying to pay for lunch, sliding my debit card across the table like a child offering a crayon drawing. He pushed it back gently, smiling. "Don't insult me," he said. I thought it was romantic. Now I know it was the first brick in the wall he would build around me. He told me I was refreshing, that I grounded him. He liked that I didn't ask for much, that I wasn't performative like the women he usually dated. I didn't see that what he really loved was the way I apologized when I took up space. In those early days, I began changing in tiny, imperceptible ways. I stopped ordering the cheapest thing on the menu, not because I could afford more, but because I wanted to seem comfortable. I laughed at his jokes even when I didn't quite get them. I started wearing nude lipstick instead of red. I told myself I was adapting, evolving. My friends noticed first. One of them, Jules, pulled me aside at a dinner party, her breath warm with gin and truth. "He never lets you finish a sentence. Have you noticed that?" I had, but I shrugged. "He's just assertive." "Yeah, well, so was my ex, and I left him for a reason." I laughed it off, defensive, embarrassed. I didn't want to admit that I'd started measuring my self-worth by how long Adrian looked at me before checking his phone. My sister Lena wasn't subtle about her suspicion. The first time she met him, she noticed he couldn't remember her name by dessert. "Elaine?" he guessed, offering her a glass of wine. "Close," she said flatly. "It's Lena." He chuckled like it was a cute mistake, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Later, when we were alone, she said, "You sure you want to do this, Em?" And I said, "He's good to me." But I didn't tell her that he hadn't said "I love you" yet. Only things like, "You're good for me," and "You make my life easier." I mistook that for love. I think part of me wanted to. When I moved into his penthouse, I left behind more than just my apartment. I left the parts of myself that couldn't be folded into his life. My books didn't match his shelves. My thrifted mugs were replaced with bone china. My favorite oversized hoodie vanished in a donation pile he scheduled without asking. He told me he loved how adaptable I was. I told myself I was lucky. We got engaged in Paris. I wore a borrowed dress and smiled for photos I didn't recognize myself in. The ring was flawless, oval, platinum, extravagant. But I missed the little silver band I'd once bought for myself. After getting promoted to assistant manager, it had meant something. This one only glittered. We married in a museum, beneath vaulted ceilings and oil paintings of women who had been seen but never heard. My dress was custom. His tuxedo was Tom Ford. I wore my mother's gold locket under the layers of imported silk, a small rebellion. A tether to the girl I used to be, Adrian's vows were charming, witty, carefully written for applause. He didn't look at me when he said them. He looked at the guests. I clutched my bouquet too tightly and told myself I was just nervous. I didn't understand that I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a performance. After the ceremony, his uncle slapped him on the back and said, "Good job, son. You really turned her life around." I smiled politely, but something inside me whispered, did I need turning around? I had stopped being a woman and started becoming proof of his generosity, his patience, his good taste in damaged women. I had become a success story he could wear like a tailored suit. Looking back, I realize how many times I abandoned myself. Every time I laughed at a joke that belittled me. Every time I stayed silent when he interrupted. Every time I brushed off a red flag and painted it pastel. But I wasn't stupid. I was just tired. And when you're tired, you'll take shelter in any arms that promise rest, even if they're the arms that will one day squeeze the life out of you. That night, the silence was so complete it had weight. It draped over my chest like a woolen shroud, making it hard to breathe. Adrian was sleeping beside me, one arm flung carelessly across my waist like I was just another pillow to possess. His breath came in steady waves, warm against my shoulder. I stared at the ceiling, watching the fan blades spin shadows across plaster. I hadn't spoken a word since I heard him on the balcony. I couldn't. Something inside me had gone quiet, not broken, not yet, but silenced. Like a lake in the dead of winter. Frozen but not empty. "She's a charity case," he had said. "My husband. The man who slipped a ring on my finger just 6 days ago with trembling hands and glittering eyes. I'd thought it was love, but now I saw it clearly. He hadn't been trembling with emotion. He had been trembling with performance. He loved the applause, not the intimacy. Next to me, the bracelet he had given me that morning caught the moonlight on the nightstand, thin, white gold, and dripping with gilt. It was meant to distract me, though he had no idea I'd heard him. I had smiled as he clasped it on my wrist, lips trembling. "Just because," he'd said. "Just because I was a fool." The metal felt cold and foreign, like a shackle that glittered to mask its weight. I didn't take it off. I wanted to remember. Every time it caught the light, I remembered. I tried to cry. I lay there until dawn, willing tears to fall, but they stayed trapped behind my eyes, thick and sharp, refusing to release me. The pain was too heavy for tears. Instead, it calcified, hardened. Grief gave way to something quieter, meaner. I got out of bed without waking him. My movements were practiced, surgical. I padded barefoot across the cold tiles of the hotel suite, the scent of sea salt and his cologne lingering in the air like a cruel perfume. I stood over the sink, bracing myself on the marble counter. My reflection looked ghostly in the mirror, pale, bloodless, and far away. I pulled the locket from beneath my camisole, my mother's. I opened it with shaking fingers, though I already knew what was inside. A tiny picture of me as a child, grinning with crooked teeth and sunburned cheeks. That girl had believed in kindness, in effort. She had believed love was something you earned. I snapped it shut. The next days passed in a haze, too bright, too still. I smiled when I had to. I wore the new sundress he bought me. I let him kiss my forehead and wrap his arm around me in restaurants. I let him touch me at night, even though I felt like a marionette in his hands. I made love like a stranger. Silent. Still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just observed. Because while he was planning sightseeing and wine tastings, I started planning something else. It began with a receipt, crumpled in the pocket of his tailored trousers. A high-end boutique I'd never stepped foot in. He'd bought a necklace, a heart-shaped diamond, and it wasn't for me. Next came the emails. He'd left his laptop open while showering. I told him I was ordering room service. Instead, I navigated with the precision of someone who had nothing left to fear. His passwords were predictable, his mother's name and his favorite wine. I found a folder titled Projects. My breath caught. Inside, emails, photos, calendar invites. There had been others. Before me. All like me. Less money, less power, more heart. He dated them, paraded them around, offered shiny things and dreams of forever. Then slowly, one by one, they disappeared. Vanished from photos. From his calendar. From his life. I was the newest addition to his collection. The latest redemption arc for his curated identity. And then I found her, de Isabel. Her name was everywhere. Restaurant reservations, flight confirmations, a spa package in Mykonos, booked for 2, dated a TI, month before our wedding. I found texts buried deep in a thread titled Work Trip. I clicked it open. You wore me out last night. Don't get too used to that bed without me. She's clueless, baby. Honestly, I think she's grateful just to be here. My stomach turned. I ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the sink before I threw up. My whole body shook, shoulders, hands, even my teeth. I gripped the edge of the counter, bile burning my throat. I wasn't his wife. I was a placeholder, a prop, a naive, little charity case in his twisted theater. And yet, even as the acid scorched my mouth, something inside me clicked into place. A clarity that felt almost divine. This was not just betrayal. This was war. I rinsed my mouth, ran cold water over my face, stared at myself until the ghost in the mirror came into focus. I had nothing left to lose. I slipped the bracelet back on, twisting it so the clasp faced outward like armor. Let him think I was still wearing the costume. Let him believe the performance was still going. But inside, I was already gone. And in her place, something colder was waking up. Something patient. Something sharp. We came back from Santorini and nothing had changed, but I had. The doorman still smiled too eagerly. The elevator still sang its mechanical hum up 42 floors. The penthouse still smelled like white lilies and bergamot, the scent of the diffuser Adrian insisted on, the one that used to feel like luxury and now felt like control. I stepped inside like a guest. I took off my sandals, placed them neatly by the door, and smiled when he asked if I wanted wine. Red, please, I said, soft and obedient. I played my part. I cooked. I laughed at his stories when we had guests over. I touched his arm just enough to seem loving. I wore the clothes he liked, soft, neutral, expensive. But beneath it all, something else moved. I was no longer the girl he had married. I was a ghost, studying the living. I moved through the rooms of our home like a thief, collecting evidence and strength in equal measure. By day, I was the perfect housewife. By night, I reclaimed my name. I rented a P.O. box 2 neighborhoods over, under my maiden name. Walker, not Laurentis. I opened a new email account, a new savings account. I transferred tiny amounts at a time, just under the threshold that would raise his suspicions. I told him I was donating to charities. He loved that, loved how generous I was with his money. I called my old mentor from grad school, the one who once told me I had a voice that could cut glass. He still worked at the publishing house. "You were always too good for footnotes," he said. "When you're ready to come back, I'll make space for you." I wrote again, at first just thoughts, then pieces of myself. I started a blog under a pseudonym. I wrote about grief, not death, but another kind. The kind that creeps in when the person you love turns into a stranger. I called it The Quiet Unbecoming. It was anonymous, unpolished, raw. Just a corner of the internet to breathe. I journaled like my life depended on it. I wrote things I couldn't say out loud. I remembered who I was before I wore silk blouses and whispered apologies at dinner parties. I remembered the girl who carried pepper spray and dog-eared books, the one with a chipped tooth from punching a boy in the 8th grade, for grabbing her best friend's skirt. The fighter. That girl wasn't gone. She had just been sleeping, and then, one Thursday morning, everything changed. I opened my blog inbox to find a message with no subject line. I think he said the same things to me. My heart stilled. The sender was anonymous, but the body of the message, it was like someone had opened my own journal and copied it back to me. He called her real. He said she was a breath of fresh air. He told her she was the only one who understood him. He gave her gifts, took her to the same restaurants, same pattern, same script. We arranged to meet in a cafe that neither of us could be traced, to quiet, unremarkable, halfway between our zip codes. I wore a scarf and sunglasses. She wore a beige trench coat, hair pulled back. Her name was Maya. She was beautiful in the kind of way you forget how to be when you've been loved poorly, understated, tired, trying. We didn't cry, we didn't hug, we just sat with 2 cups of chamomile tea between us and laid our stories on the table like cards. Her hands trembled when she passed me a manila folder, emails, voice messages, photos. In one of them, I saw Adrian's hand resting on her hip. He was smiling, wearing the same shirt he wore the day we signed our prenup. That stung more than anything. We talked for hours, not about revenge, yet, just about the ache, the way he made you feel seen, then erased you 1 page at a time. He collects women like pressed flowers, she said. He loves them most when they're quiet and easy to frame. I gave her closure. She gave me evidence. And something unspoken bloomed between us. An alliance built not just on pain, but on clarity. We were no longer women betrayed. We were women returned to ourselves. When I left that cafe, I walked taller. Not because I was free yet, but because I wasn't alone anymore. The first thing I did was cut my hair, not in anger, not to spite him, but to release her, the girl who waited for him to notice her new dresses, who curled the same waves every morning because he liked effortless beauty. I stood in the mirror of a salon 2 neighborhoods away and whispered, "Take it off." The stylist's shears moved like scissors through silk. The strands fell to the floor like shed skin. I left with hair that barely brushed my jawline, and for the first time in years, I saw my cheekbones again. I saw me. Adrian didn't even look up when I came home. "New cut?" he asked absently, scrolling through something on his phone. I nodded. He grunted. I didn't need his approval anymore. I wasn't looking for it. The next week, I sold the diamond earrings he gave me for our engagement anniversary. With the cash, I bought a used Volvo, silver, solid, mine. I parked it 3 blocks away and paid the meter in cash. He thought I still relied on his black SUV and his driver. He didn't know I had started going places without him. I returned to therapy, found a woman with soft eyes and a spine of steel. I told her everything, from the balcony in Santorini to the girl I met in the cafe. She didn't flinch. She handed me a notebook and said, "Let's rebuild." And so I did. 1 brick at a time. I applied for jobs under a different name, my middle name Elise. A small publishing house in Brooklyn offered me a part-time editing role. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I edited manuscripts from a laptop he didn't know existed, sipping coffee in a little bookstore that smelled like paper and pine. He thought I spent my afternoons at the spa. He stopped noticing long ago. That invisibility, once a wound, became a weapon. The day I saw Isabel in person, it wasn't what I expected. She was sitting alone at a table in a hotel bar, sipping white wine, staring at the condensation on the glass like it held answers. She looked up when I approached. "May I?" I asked, motioning to the seat across from her. She blinked, startled, then nodded. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked at her like a researcher observing a puzzle. "Was it worth it?" She swallowed. Her lipstick cracked at the corner of her mouth. She didn't answer with words, just lowered her eyes, shame blooming like a bruise. I almost pitied her. "He told you were different," I said softly. "Did he make you feel rescued?" She nodded slowly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "He collects us like lost kittens, and when we grow claws, he drops us off at the shelter." She laughed, bitter and small. "I thought I was the only one." "You're one of many," I said, "but you don't have to stay one of his secrets." She gave me what she had. Not because I demanded it, but because I saw her. Because I didn't try to make her the villain. We were both collateral. One by one, I found more. Maya introduced me to 2 others, Lena and Camilla. Lena had met him at a startup pitch event. Camilla had been his personal assistant for a year. Both had been discarded with matching scripts and promises. They came to me quietly, cautiously, but I didn't offer vengeance. I offered truth. "Tell me your story," I'd say. And they did. They handed me screenshots, timelines, receipts, and I built something with it. Not a revenge fantasy, but a roadmap, a trail of behavior, a pattern of predation. I consulted a lawyer, a woman recommended by my therapist. Smart, sharp, discreet. I told her everything. She looked at the timeline. The evidence, the prenup I had finally read. He used your vulnerability against you, she said. But that's not going to save him. We built a case, not for war, but for liberation. Not to destroy him, but to walk away intact. Each step I took, I walked a little taller. I changed my perfume, threw out the cloying white florals he loved. I found something darker, deeper, sandalwood and amber. When I walked into a room now, I didn't disappear. I lingered. I wore color again. Burgundy, emerald, midnight blue. I pulled the locket from the back of my jewelry box, the one my mother gave me, and wore it over my heart, even under a sweater. At night, I looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw someone I didn't want to apologize for. Wasn't plotting anymore. I was preparing. The difference was everything. The night shimmered with vanity. Strings of white lights looped from the ballroom ceiling like constellations trying too hard. Crystal chandeliers dripped opulence. A violinist played something elegant and forgettable. I stood at the top of the main stairs, the hem of my red dress grazing the marble step, watching the spectacle below like a guest at my own life. He didn't see me at first. He was surrounded by men in tuxedos, women with stiff cheekbones and tighter smiles. A waiter brushed past him and he barely blinked, still allergic to eye contact with those who served. That hadn't changed, but I had. The red dress was deliberate, sleek, bold, backless. The opposite of every soft pastel thing he used to pick. For me. I had done my own makeup, wore perfume that smelled like dusk and daring. Around my wrist, I wore the bracelet he once gave me, the one that once felt like a shackle. It hung loose now, nearly sliding off my hand. Hollow, pretty, meaningless. He turned. His smile froze when he saw me. I watched it, the calculation flickering behind his eyes, trying to place me in this version, trying to read the script. But there wasn't one anymore. Not one he'd written. "Darling," he said, coming closer, voice dipped in polished charm. I kissed his cheek like a memory. "Adrian, you look stunning." "I know." I floated away before he could respond. This was his night. A charity. Gala honoring his philanthropy, his dedication to empowering women. The irony had teeth. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, invisible and radiant. The plan wasn't revenge. Not really, just revelation. The moment came near the end, after the speeches and praise. The MC, a polished woman in sequins, announced the final toast. To honor the man of the hour, Adrian Blackwell, his wife has prepared a few words. Hush. He looked confused. I stepped forward, heels echoing against marble, heart steady. The mic was cool in my hand. I looked out over the sea of faces. Some familiar, some not. All watching. "I won't take long," I began, voice calm. "I just want to tell you a story." I saw him shift, the first thread of unease tugging at his posture. "There was once a man," I said, eyes scanning the crowd, not him, who had a gift for rescuing women. He sought out the soft ones, the scarred ones. He wrapped them in silk, called them rare, made them feel chosen. A murmur rustled through the room. "This man," I continued, "didn't ask what they wanted. He just gave, lavishly, publicly. And when they tried to give back, to stand on their own, he quietly resented it. Because power, not love, was the currency." I paused. Not for effect, for breath. He wore kindness like a suit, but behind closed doors, it was condescension, control. I didn't name him, I didn't need to. I smiled gently. Some of those women were discarded, others escaped. Some are here tonight. Now he was standing, pale beneath his tan. I removed the bracelet from my wrist and placed it on the podium. The metal clinked softly like a closing door. "I wore this for years," I said. "A gift, a symbol, but not of love, of silence." I stepped back. The crowd didn't clap, Not immediately. They just stared, frozen, processing. I didn't stay. For the fallout. As I walked out of the ballroom, I heard the soft beginning of whispers. A ripple. A wave forming. By morning, it was a storm. The press caught wind. Donations were pulled. Women began to speak. Stories spilled like wine on white linens. But I didn't watch it unfold. Justice wasn't my entertainment. I signed the divorce. Papers in a quiet cafe 2 weeks later. The lawyer slid them across the table, her lips pressed, but satisfied. I wore jeans, a sweater, no makeup. My reflection in the window was soft, unguarded. I signed my name with steady fingers. When I stood, I looked out the glass and smiled at nothing. My new apartment was small, sunlit, full of green things. Plants, books, watercolor paintings. A record player spun Ella Fitzgerald on slow mornings. The windows were always cracked open. The air was always mine. I kept the locket, wore it some days, not as a relic, but as a reminder. I came back. There were nights I still woke reaching for something that wasn't there. The ghost of old fears. But the difference was, I could breathe through them now. I didn't shrink anymore. I expanded. Some people say closure comes with a bang, with slammed doors and shouted truths. Mine came with a sigh, with space, with peace.